Welcome to Culture and Christianity. Today, I'm the guest. Sorry, you're stuck. This is perspectives on what's unfolding in the world around us. And the real goal is not just to identify the news. You can get that from a lot of places. But I think it's a struggle to understand what to do with what we're watching. When what you see is so far outside the bounds of what you expect, some explanation is needed, or you need to process it, or I need to process it. And that's really my goal today, to take some of the events we're watching in the news that are beyond bizarre, that are handed to us as if they're normal. It's like watching water run uphill. You want to talk to somebody to help you understand if we should all expect that to happen more often. And right now, their water's running uphill, and they're trying to tell us it's normal. So there's some things going on in Israel I think we ought to talk about. I think Afghanistan deserves just a glance. I don't know if you pay any attention to that country, but we have a heavy investment in Afghanistan of blood and treasure. And the people of that country should matter to us after so many of our young people went there and made sacrifices. Then we're in the midst of an election cycle. I hope you know that by now. If you don't, welcome back to the world of the living. But I think what's going on with Kamala or Kamala, or I'm still working on that pronunciation, and the Trump campaign, there's a lot of stuff around that. So that's the target today. But most of all, to see if we can get a biblical worldview on it. Not that I'm the purveyor of everything that's biblical, but we can at least look through that filter and see if we can understand. I started in Israel. I've been going in and out of Israel since I was a boy. I've been there a couple of times this year, have a lot of friends there. I lived there, studied at the university there. So it's not just an opinion. And not just the opinion of a tourist. I've been on the ground enough that it feels like family to me. Israel has launched a strike, or several strikes, into southern Lebanon against Hezbollah, which is another Iranian proxy. I did an interview in the last few days with a man that works with the Heritage Institute, who is an expert on international relations. And he said, understanding the Middle East is simple. Iran causes most of the trouble. And I mean, that's about as accurate in a sentence as I know how to get to. Hezbollah and Hamas, those two terrorist organizations, no apology. They are on record in the international media and elsewhere. You can find it with a little help from Rabbi Google. Their goal is to annihilate the Jewish state and drive the Jewish people into the sea. Their stated objective is genocide. And we continue to provide humanitarian aid to them. I hope you understand that is bizarre. Somebody who is committed to genocide, and we provide aid to them. That is backwards. But the Israelis have launched these preemptive attacks. The Hezbollah has been raining rockets down in Israel. It hasn't had much media attention. Gaza's had most of the attention. There's almost 100,000 Israelis that have been out of their homes since last October. I met several of them when I was in Israel in June. The kids haven't been in their schools. The families haven't been in their homes. All of their normal routines have been disrupted. They are, in essence, refugees in their own country. The Israeli military has to be mobilized because of these constant military threats. The majority of the Israeli military are reservist. It's a small country. So when they call up 200,000 people for the military, men and women, they come from the reserves, which means they have to leave jobs and have to leave their families. It's a tremendous disruption of the economy. One of the largest sectors of the Israeli economy is tourism, and there has been, in effect, no tourism since last October. So it's as if economic sanctions have been imposed upon Israel. I get emails almost on a daily basis from friends in Israel that are struggling. I had one today from a friend in the church, but has an Israeli friend who had sent a cry for help. And I said, it's absolutely legitimate. It's not as if we have, in effect, helped put these sanctions on the economy of Israel. We removed all the sanctions from Iran. They're selling petroleum to the world again. They have been enriched so that they can support Hamas and Hezbollah and their other terrorist proxies. And they are in full-fledged pursuit of a nuclear weapon. Iran has announced that by the end of the year, they'll have a nuclear weapon. If Iran is nuclear, it changes the Middle East and it changes the world. They have shown us over and over again that they will carry out the threats they make, and they have stated that they want to destroy us. You have to be beyond naive not to believe that there are terror cells in the United States. We've had an open border, almost a totally open border now for 4 years. A nuclear Iran is an unimaginable idea. It changes the balance of power in the world. And they're saying they'll do that by the end of the year. The Israelis would do something about it militarily, but the United States will not give them the tools they need to do that. The armaments they would need to disrupt that nuclear plan would come from the United States, and while Congress has approved them, the administration won't release it. So we're playing this very frightening game of cat and mouse with the Iranians and letting the Israelis be at the point of the spear. But it is a very, very serious time. So if you're not in the habit of praying for the peace of Jerusalem, you should start. And if you're still watching the demonstrations that are in favor of the terrorists, Hamas and Hezbollah, I hope you'll watch who's sponsoring them. It gives you an insight into their worldview. If they'll support Hamas, they will not support liberty and freedom and free speech and women's rights and children's rights. They will not support diversity. They will not support inclusivity. Those things do not flourish in places where Hamas and Hezbollah have any authority, I promise, which is probably a good transition. I mentioned Afghanistan a moment ago. I hope you saw, it wasn't too many days ago, I saw pictures and video in the social media. They had a military parade in Afghanistan. Looked like something you would see in the former Soviet Union or in present-day China, where they have all their military hardware and equipment, and they're rolling down some big street, and the troops are marching. The only difference in this parade in Afghanistan is it was U.S. military trucks and armored vehicles and military hardware, with the Taliban were the soldiers. So they were boasting of the weapons they have from our withdrawal. It was a horrific presentation. We are giving, the numbers vary a bit, but $50 to $100 million a week to the Taliban in Afghanistan. Now, I want to say that again. We're giving tens of millions of dollars a week to the Taliban in Afghanistan. You understand they're a religious organization. What holds them together, the binding force for the Taliban is not a nation. It's not a geographic boundary. It is a faith. And the United States government is supporting that violent expression of Islam with tens of millions of dollars. They passed a law in recent days called their Vice and Virtue laws. They have banned women in public from speaking. If in a public place a woman's voice is heard or her face is visible, she is subject to arrest and much worse. I'm trying to find the outrage on our campuses. I'm looking for the responses from the women's rights activists that scour our culture to look for micro problems, when in Afghanistan, if a woman speaks in public, she is subject to arrest and worse. Folks, we have a great investment in Afghanistan. More than a decade of our treasure and the blood of our finest young people to bring freedom there, and then we withdrew with the promise that it was secure and stable, and the sacrifices that we had made to help the women and children and the people there would be maintained. Not only did those sacrifices evaporate, and the people have been subject to horrific things, but we gave them billions of dollars of armaments, and now we're giving them millions of dollars a week. Insane is too kind of a word for what we're watching. I hope you pay attention. Well, the other thing that's going on is the election. Are you tired? I'm tired. But it's like a workout. You can't stop when you're tired. You got to finish the workout or you miss the benefit. If it's physical exercise, they tell me that the greatest benefit is in the last 10% of the workout, where you make the effort to push through when you're tired and all the messaging coming from your muscles and your brain and your lungs is, it's enough, stop. If you'll push through that and you finish well, I'm told by the people who are these physiologists that that's the greatest benefit of the entire workout. I hope they haven't lied, because I've tried to finish workouts for a long time. Well, I'm going to submit to you that that premise holds true in an election cycle. It doesn't matter whether we're tired or not. We've got to run all the way through the tape. We have to run all the way through the end of this contest, because it's going to require perseverance. So we can all acknowledge we're tired of the messaging and the deception and the manipulation and the attacks and the counterattacks. But the reality is we got to finish this. We just finished not long ago the Democratic National Convention, which was one of the most, I'm looking for my pastor word, farcical presentations I've seen in a long time. We have a new Democratic candidate for president who has never received a vote. In my lifetime, that's never happened before. So we have a Democratic ticket that wasn't chosen by the American people. We're not exactly even sure who did make the selection. We were told that President Biden decided that he would not accept the nomination, which he had earned through campaigning for the delegates that were given to him. We were told he would step aside, but we weren't told who made the decision that it should be Kamala Harris. I hope that's troubling to you. We're a representative democracy. We have somebody on the ticket for the most powerful office in our nation, and we don't know who decided they should do that. That is a violation of the fundamentals of our system, as I understand it. And now we have someone who's on the Democratic ticket being lauded for us as this amazing, remarkable, most gifted leader who will bring joy to all, which is an intriguing label to me. Now, we know who she is. She's been in office for several years. We know the policies she supported. She has campaigned in the past for the presidency, for the Senate. So she has a very public record. There's lots of videotape and lots of sound bites of Kamala Harris as an advocate for an open border, for there being no punitive measures taken for those who come into our country illegally, a supporter of Bidenomics, casting the deciding vote in the Senate when it was necessary for some of the largest spending bills in American history, things that the economists pretty generally agree fueled inflation. She's been a very enthusiastic supporter of abortion on demand throughout a pregnancy, up to the point of delivery. She's been an advocate for the LGBTQ plus movement. She has not used her voice to speak for violence against women. It's a pretty unsettling set of things. And now we're being told that those really aren't her positions anymore. While she's campaigned on the platform and stood behind the policies that were against fracking, which made Pennsylvania a very profitable state, their technology was making energy available to us at some of the lowest prices in our history, at least modern history. And now we're told that she's not opposed to fracking. But we haven't heard her say it. In fact, we haven't heard her say anything about any of these positions. It's just magically appeared in the social media. We have these spokespersons that say Kamala Harris no longer believes that. We haven't heard her say that. Is that troubling to you? You know, if you're in the habit of watching content that I create, whether it's this podcast or a sermon you watch or a television show, and if the next episode you turned on or the next podcast you pulled up, I wasn't present and some surrogate was here in my place and said, Alan sent me to tell you he no longer endorses Christianity. He's a Buddhist. I hope that would give you pause and you would wonder what had happened to me. What had caused me to change my mind? In fact, before you rendered a decision on whether you thought that was a credible statement or not, I think you would want to hear me have a dialogue about it and explain to you how I had reversed a position that I have held for many years. Well, if you're asking for the job to be the leader of our nation, It feels only reasonable to me that we should have a full explanation why someone would make a 180-degree reversal in a whole host of policies that they have held very publicly. And to look at me or to look at you and say, no, just take the word of a surrogate. This is what they believe. That's beyond cynical. It's a mockery of the process. It would be a mockery of this podcast. It would be a mockery of the office I have stood in for some years of my life if I completely reversed the fundamental opinions of what I thought was good for the people I was providing leadership to, and then I offered no explanation. And it just seems to me as if the system is mocking the American public, as if we're too stupid, we're too uninformed, we're so disconnected, we could care less. I hope you won't fall prey for that. If the opinions have truly changed and there's a new set of values that are in place, and now there's a whole new set of things that you think should describe the future of our nation, I'm intrigued by that. Help me understand. But don't just have a surrogate tell me that you have changed your mind and you refuse to talk about it. It's very troubling that there are forces in our nation powerful enough to orchestrate something like that. You know, I watched it happen with President Biden, and it started under the cover of COVID. Because of the COVID restrictions, he was going to campaign from his basement. And then we watched that continue when COVID was clearly not the threat that we'd imagined it might have been when we first heard about it. But he never really engaged with the people. And he made it all the way to the White House, secured the election, at least in the opinion of many. And then we watched that he really wasn't able to talk to the American people in a coherent fashion without the help of a teleprompter. We've all watched the video clips of him having trouble. I have had people that I have cared a great deal about that suffered cognitive decline. If you've ever been in that circumstance, it's a painful thing to watch. The gradual diminishment of someone, the loss of their presence rationally, they lose their personality, at least the personality that you have known. And we have watched that happen with the President of the United States. In fact, he's completely absent from the stage right now, and the Middle East is teetering on an all-out war with the potential of plunging us into a global war, and we haven't had the slightest comment, nothing comforting the American people, nothing saying to us, you know, we're watching over this, or this is what we're doing. Well, they managed to do that with President Biden with very minimal conversation. Now we have a candidate that we didn't even choose, that wasn't selected, that has made a 180-degree change on policies. They've gone from being the border czar, where I'm in charge of the border and I'm going to fix the root causes of this, and you'll see my effectiveness because the flood of illegal immigrants will be stopped because I'm going to address the root of this problem. Well, none of that happened. So now we're told, no, that was never true. You didn't see that. That didn't really happen. It's absurd. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have former President Trump campaigning. He's shot in the face. And I don't know any way to explain that other than an act of God. He turned his head at the fraction of a second that caused his life to be spared. Had he not turned his head, we'd have already had his funeral. The events surrounding that assassination attempt are so clear and so plain, I don't believe they can be understood as just incompetence. Highly trained people who've dedicated their life to law enforcement and protecting the innocent are not as incompetent as what happened in Pennsylvania on the day when former President Trump was shot. At some level, that had to, at the very least, have been permitted. We don't have enough information. We don't know anything about the shooter. You know, what we do know is so limited. But we have Mr. Trump campaigning, and he'll talk to anybody anywhere. And now with his vice presidential candidate, they're a pretty rowdy team. And we're told all the time that you can't believe Mr. Trump. He's a liar. and that Vice President Harris is the pinnacle, the epitome of truthfulness and integrity. Don't pay any attention to the flip-flopping. That doesn't count. Mr. Trump's morality is called into question all the time. I don't hear an equal vetting of Vice President Harris's moral behavior over the breadth of her life. They've combed through President Trump's life and brought out every embarrassing circumstance they could find and interviewed anybody who was he may have had an involvement with. We've had nothing even closely resembling that with Vice President Harris. But we're told President Trump is not trustworthy. His ideas for our country, they don't want to talk about the policies. When they talk about them, it's just because they've been adopted by his opponents. It's too bizarre to look at and not think that there's a spiritual component to it. Now, I'm saddened that the discussion doesn't take place in enough churches. We have this bizarre idea that we can't talk about faith and politics in polite company. Well, if that's the case, then the only people talking about faith and politics are impolite, and that's not going to be a good outcome for us. If you don't have the courage to talk about what you believe and why you believe it, any place you go, you don't believe it. I live in Tennessee. If you're a real advocate for the University of Tennessee, if you're a real Vol fan, you will talk about it in the middle of Alabama, and that takes courage. You enjoy driving through Georgia with your Vol flag on your car. I mean, it's a point of pride and determination that you'll take your loyalty wherever you go. And as Christians, we've got to have the courage to take our faith wherever we go. You know, now the Trump campaign is pushing up against censorship again. In the last election, there's no question that President Trump was censored. There's no question that opinions about COVID and what was happening in our country were censored. They've acknowledged it, that the FBI worked with social media companies in monitoring content that was favorable to what they were trying to communicate. Our government, our federal government, involved in the censorship of free speech. Oh, never mind things like the Constitution. Don't get heated up about the Bill of Rights. And now they don't even apologize. I heard someone say, a credible person, an educated person, a person in a position of great influence said, well, you shouldn't imagine that the First Amendment extends to cover misinformation. Oh, yes, I should. Free speech isn't limited to just speech that is true. That's such an absurd statement, an absurd proposition. And we would have to be beyond stupid to accept such a premise. It's not limited to the United States. I wish it were. If it were, it would be a much simpler equation. Free speech is under full-blown assault around the world. You know, I think, that there's no such thing as free speech in China. You know there's no free speech in Cuba. You know the Marxist countries of the world don't tolerate free speech. We know the former Soviet Union didn't tolerate free speech. But in the West, we've always at least had this illusion that we would tolerate free speech. But now they're trying to shred the illusion. The man who's the owner of Telegram, the app, was arrested recently in France. I think he's Russian, but he has a French citizenship. So when he landed in Paris, he was arrested. They said Telegram has been used for some nefarious things. Some criminals had used a social media platform for something, and because he didn't take it down or recognize it as misinformation, he was arrested and held culpable. You recognize how absurd that is. Think of what our telephones have been used for. Think of the wickedness, the evil, the vile things that have been perpetrated because of communications over telephones. Nobody's ever suggested we arrest Ma Bell, or that Verizon is the culprit, or that the people who provided the hardware. You know, the old school idea was we arrested the people who misbehaved. But in an age where they're trying to make censorship and propaganda normal, they're telling us we should blame the platforms. You know, free speech used to mean you had the right to say in public whatever you wanted to say. The limits on that were you couldn't say something that caused immediate harm to someone. But we all understood that private communications were used to cause harm to people. I mean, the list of those. We have short stories written about phone calls that are used to elicit murder. We have movies that are made about all of those things. Please don't accept this as normal. It's not normal. It's not acceptable. It is a big step down a very slippery slope to totalitarianism. And if we tolerate it, I assure you, we will lose our liberties and freedoms. We already understand that Facebook is not level ground, that TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat, that these social media platforms are manipulating free speech. I've read multiple suggestions since the owner of Telegram was arrested that Elon Musk be arrested because he isn't censoring X or Twitter to suit his adversaries. Folks, this isn't just distressing. This will shape our future. And it's not a 20-year plan. They will, whatever changes that they have the courage to try, they will try in the weeks and the months ahead. I hope you're watching. I hope the best way to counteract that. People say to me so frequently, what can I do? I'm not a multi-billionaire. I can't buy X. No, but you can practice telling the truth at your kitchen table. You can start telling the truth to the friends that you spend your discretionary time with. When you go to the ball games to watch your kids play, or you're getting together with the people in your neighborhood for a block party, tell the truth. Talk about what you see happening. Well, everybody won't like it. No kidding. No kidding. The free exchange of ideas, the opportunity to sit down and say, this is what I believe and why I believe it, and listen to somebody else that has a different opinion and still respect one another is a part of a healthy life. This notion that if I say I disagree with you gives you the liberty to begin to call me names, try to attach labels to me, and scream at me is bizarre. It's a very carefully developed form of bullying and intimidation. And they have used now the legal system and the social media platforms and our communication tools to try to convince us that we're inappropriate. It's bizarre. So as you're watching the campaign, the fruit of our lives, Jesus said, you'll know us by our fruit. Since Mr. Trump has been in the public arena, I can't speak for his whole life, since he's been in the public arena as a politician, he seems to have behaved in a way that is consistent with a moral view. I don't know all the details. All I know is what's reported. I think the anger and the hatred directed at him for places and things he was 30 and 40 years ago is a bit bizarre until they're going to apply the same standards to Kamala and her vice presidential running mate. I don't know what the outcome of the election will be. I think the most important component, people ask me what I would do, how I would pray. I pray that we have a fair election. The people who are legal citizens and register vote have the freedom to vote without interruption, that they're not allowed to vote more than once, that there is true accountability in the election, folks. Accountability is not suppression. If you have to show a driver's license before, or some form of ID, before you can buy alcohol, it seems reasonable to me that you would need ID to vote. I've been in many theme parks where you have to be so tall, and there's usually a sign standing there that says, if you're not this tall, you can't ride this ride. Nobody screams that that's discriminatory. We think it's for protection of the people who are participating. The theater of the absurd is making statements to you and me on such a regular basis that it's overwhelming. I'll give you one. We just saw the Democratic convention not long ago, and they had an abortion bus out in front, and a theme throughout the convention that abortion, apparently the calculus is, abortion is an idea that's so popular that they can garner power in America by being for abortion up to the point that a child is delivered. I don't agree with that, but that seems to be the calculus because they put an abortion bus front and center at the convention and boasted every day about how many abortions were performed. And the line we hear most frequently is, it's my body, my choice. with great enthusiasm, with great determination, with great indignation. Nobody can tell me what to do with my body. What a load of crap. That's a Greek word. It means I disagree. First of all, during COVID, if my memory serves me correctly, a lot of the same people saying that mandated vaccinations. If you wouldn't allow someone to vaccinate you with an experimental vaccine, then your jobs were threatened. You weren't welcomed in a public store. You weren't welcomed in public places. Your travel privileges were revoked. So my body, my choice didn't work there. It's a statement of convenience on topics of convenience. And every adult, emotional adult, understands that choices have consequences. And our freedoms only extend up to a certain point. I can give you many examples of that. We have all accepted the premise, the law, that you don't have the choice to drink alcoholic beverages and drive a vehicle. You can choose to drink alcohol, but you forfeit your right to drive because it's dangerous for yourself and it could be for others. So we've made that decision as a group of people. If you have children and you're going to put them in your automobile, you don't have the privilege of doing that however you would like. There are laws. You don't get to choose whether your kids ride in the front seat. I grew up as a child standing in the seat next to the driver with my elbow on their shoulder. That was pretty common practice. And if you came to a stop too suddenly, the driver would throw their arm out, their right arm out, to grab the children that were in the front seat with them and keep us from falling into the floor or falling into the dashboard. I know it sounds reckless and dangerous, but there's a whole generation of Americans that survived that foolishness. Or we'd get in the back seat of the car and climb up in the back window of the car. Some of the cars were built, there was a place up there where we'd climb up in that window. So if they hit the brakes hard, you'd come tumbling out of the back window and fall into the floorboard. I know, reckless parenting. We survived. Probably explains a lot about my condition these days. But today the rules are, if you put a child in the car, you have to put him in a car seat. You don't get a choice. You'll forfeit your right to parent. I mean, I could go on and on with the list, folks. We understand fundamentally, you don't get to make whatever choice you want. There are points of responsibility in our lives at which we forfeit the freedom to choose anything we want. Now, human life, the beginning of human life, the existence of human life comes with responsibilities. And we have lost our minds on this issue. We've lost 60 million children. We lose 3,000 children a day. Think about that. When was the last time you were in a crowd of 3,000 people? At a concert, at a ball game, church service? Where were you where you were in a group of 3,000 people? How many students attend the school where you went to high school or the university where you went? Well, think about it in terms of 3,000. We lose 3,000 children a day to abortion, primarily because people say, that's my choice, I want to. 46% of abortions, almost half of abortions, are women who have already delivered a child. So it's not a mystery. They're very aware of the life that is present. That's not a choice that we can endorse and imagine we will remain a civil society. People say to me, I can't be a one-issue voter. Baloney. We're all more than willing to be a one-issue voter if it's an issue that matters enough to us. As much as any election in my memory, the election cycle this year has presented us with a very clear choice. To the extent that we have a candidate that'll talk and one that won't. I don't know what the outcome will be, because I think without God's sovereign intervention, there's a small chance that we have a fair and open election. I think there's likely chaos on the first Wednesday in November, irrespective of what happens in that first Tuesday. It's time to pray. It's time to pray for simple things, for the peace of Jerusalem. It's time to pray that we'll have the courage to tell the truth at our kitchen tables. Until we're willing to do that, stop worrying about the table in the White House. If you're not willing to own a biblical worldview at home, please don't ask somebody else to carry that burden in front of thousands or millions of people. It's illegitimate, and it reflects a cowardice on our part that we have to be willing to address. If we'll start at the kitchen table, pray that we'll have a fair and open election. Pray that our children in our schools will once again be educated from a biblical worldview. They don't have to be taught to be fundamentalist Christians, but they need to be taught a biblical worldview. They need to be taught about the Christian heritage of our nation. We've stepped away from too many things that are essential to who we are, and we see the consequences of it. Folks, we're $35 trillion in debt. It's unsustainable. We have leaders who won't talk to us. That's not a good thing. We have the heads of teachers' unions that tell us they know about educating our children more than our parents do. That's unacceptable. We're sacrificing our children on the altar of convenience. That's just horrific. And this is our watch. I know we called the World War II generation the greatest generation, the generation that was willing to fight the Civil War to say slavery will not continue in this nation. We'll make the sacrifices. I got to wrap up, but if I could talk to the guys for just a minute. One of our primary assignments is protection. I know that makes some people angry, but I believe it's still true. We've been told that the best way to protect our children is to buckle them in a car seat, to make them wear a helmet when they ride a bicycle, and to put on sunscreen when they go to the beach. Now, I believe all those things are important. I don't want to diminish them. But if you put sunscreen on your kids and you send them to school and let them be inundated with the propaganda of DEI and CRT, you're not protecting your kids. We have been coached into a passive parenting that's defined by a secular culture, and we are offering our children up as sacrifices to evil. Let's decide to be the generation that said it's enough. The response begins on our knees by saying to God, we're sorry. We weren't confused. We just weren't that interested. But now we've been awakened, and we're asking for your mercy. We're willing to change our hearts and our lives and our behaviors. Will you help us? There is an abundance of information in Scripture and the history of the church to suggest that God will meet us if we will make those decisions. You're not powerless. They may not be interested in your opinion in the halls of Congress. Supreme Court justices may not be calling to ask your perspective on the cases they're reviewing. But if you're a Christ follower in the halls of heaven, you have an invitation to file a petition. Why would we not do that? Church, let's pray. It's time for Christianity to be a part of our culture again. We've been on the sidelines too long, but we're getting back in the game. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me. Keep praying, keep seeking the Lord. God's moving. We want to be a part of what He's doing. Hey, thanks for joining me today. Before you go, please like the podcast and leave a comment so more people can hear about this topic too. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe to Alan Jackson Ministries YouTube channel and follow the Culture and Christianity podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast. Together, let's learn how to lead with our faith and change our culture. I'll see you next time.